In the small town of Ashford, Texas, the nights were silent, once thriving. The area had become something of a ghost town after the factories closed in the late 80s, but there was one thing people still whispered about whenever the subject of local legends came up: station 104.6 FM. Back in 1986, the radio station shut down under strange circumstances. The official story said there had been an equipment failure and budget cuts, but locals told a different version. They said the final broadcast ended with screams. No one knew who the screams belonged to, and no one ever explained why the DJ signed off by saying a single cryptic sentence: "Don't listen past midnight." For nearly 4 decades, the station remained abandoned. Boarded up windows, rusting satellite dish, and walls covered in ivy. But some late-night drivers swore they could still hear it. 104.6 FM, static, humming, and a faint voice calling their names. Eric had heard these stories growing up, but never believed them, until one night in early October, he was driving back home from a friend's house along the old county highway that cut through the woods. His phone had no signal, and the only light came from his headlights, stretching into the empty road ahead. To stay awake, he turned on the radio and scanned through stations, expecting nothing but static. Then he hit 104.6. At first, he thought it was a normal broadcast, a soft hum, a faint melody, and then a voice. The DJ spoke calmly, slowly, like he was telling a bedtime story, but something about his tone made Eric's stomach tighten. The DJ was describing the road ahead of him. Every curve, every tree, every faded street sign, word for word, perfectly matching what Eric was seeing through his windshield. At first, he thought it was coincidence, but then the DJ mentioned the billboard just beyond the next turn. A billboard Eric couldn't even see yet, and said it was half collapsed, with a torn image of a woman smiling. When Eric turned the corner, the billboard was exactly as described. The DJ's voice lowered slightly, almost a whisper now, as though speaking directly into his car. He said Eric shouldn't be out there at this hour, that the highway had a way of collecting people after midnight, that some roads led somewhere you couldn't come back from. Eric's hand hovered over the dial, ready to change stations, but then the DJ said something that froze him completely. He said Eric's full name. Eric turned the volume down immediately, heart pounding. But even when the sound faded, the DJ kept talking, his voice cutting through the static like he was sitting in the back seat. The man said Eric had a choice: keep driving forward or turn around. But he warned him that if he went any farther, he wouldn't find the exit back to town. For a moment, Eric almost turned around, but his curiosity and stubbornness got the better of him. He kept driving. The air inside the car grew heavier, warmer, like something unseen had slipped inside with him. The DJ stopped talking for a few seconds, replaced by a low, pulsing hum that rattled through the speakers. Then the voice returned. Only this time, it wasn't just the DJ. There were others. Dozens of faint, overlapping whispers filled the car, chanting something Eric couldn't understand. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language he'd ever heard before. The voices rose and fell like waves, and somewhere beneath them, he could hear crying. Suddenly, his headlights flickered, and the road ahead changed. The tall trees and broken streetlights were gone. Instead, the pavement was cracked and uneven, lined with rusting street signs in shapes he didn't recognize. There were no stars, no moon, just a dark, endless void surrounding the road. Eric slammed on the brakes. He checked his phone again. Still no signal. Then the DJ said something else. He said Eric had reached the in-between. Eric's chest tightened. The DJ explained in that same calm, unshaken tone that the old radio station had never really shut down. It had simply moved. It wasn't broadcasting for entertainment anymore. It was broadcasting to find people. Before Eric could react, the whispers stopped. The hum stopped, and everything was silent. And then, faintly, from somewhere far behind him, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, wet, deliberate. He looked in his rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. Just a faint glow of his taillights disappearing into the black void. Eric pressed his foot on the gas, forcing the car forward, the tires squealing against the cracked asphalt. But no matter how fast he drove, the road didn't seem to end. The numbers on his dashboard climbed, but the scenery never changed. Just that same broken pavement, stretching into forever. Then the radio crackled again. This time, it wasn't the DJ. It was his mother's voice. She sounded panicked, pleading for him to stop the car. But Eric knew it couldn't be her. His mother had passed away 3 years ago. He shut the radio off entirely. For a few seconds, there was blissful silence, until he realized the voice hadn't come from the speakers at all. It was whispering directly into his ear. Eric swerved hard, nearly losing control, but managed to straighten the car again. His breath came fast and uneven as he pushed harder on the accelerator. And then, the road ended. It's like that. No warning, no intersection. The pavement simply stopped, replaced by an endless stretch of black water, reflecting nothing above it. He hit the brakes just in time, his car skidding to a stop a few feet from the edge. And in the middle of the dark water stood a building, the old radio station. The same boarded up walls, the same rusted satellite dish, the same cracked windows, except now the lights inside were glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The radio, which he turned off minutes ago, switched on by itself. The DJ spoke again, his voice quiet but sharp, every word deliberate. "Welcome back to station 104.6. We've been waiting for you." And then Eric's car stalled. He tried restarting the engine, but it was dead. He glanced in his mirrors, heart hammering, and saw something move in the black water. Shapes, dozens of them, faces breaking the surface. The whispers returned, louder this time, coming from every direction. Eric threw the door open and ran. The moment his feet hit the ground, the sound of static filled the air like a scream. He didn't look back, didn't dare. He just sprinted into the darkness until his legs gave out. When he opened his eyes again, he was parked on the side of the highway. Daylight breaking through the trees. His phone had a signal. His car started on the first try. For a moment, Eric thought maybe it had all been a dream. But when he glanced at the radio, the dial was locked on 104.6 FM, and faintly, just beneath the static, he heard the DJ whisper his name again. In a small Ohio town called Miller's Creek, there's an old, crumbling bridge deep inside the woods. The locals called it Hollow Bend Bridge, and for decades, people whispered about its dark history. According to the stories, back in the 1960s, a young woman vanished there one rainy night. Some believed she had slipped and fallen into the river below. Others claimed she had been lured by something she couldn't see. Since then, rumors spread about a curse tied to the bridge. Those who crossed it after midnight were said to hear whispers, see strange lights, and sometimes catch a glimpse of the vanished woman herself. They called her the Lady of Hollow Bend. Most people laughed it off, saying it was nothing more than an urban legend designed to scare kids away from trespassing. For years, Eric, his sister Hannah, and their 2 friends, Jake and Morgan, had heard the stories but never believed them. That changed on one warm summer night when boredom led them to make a plan. They decided to drive out to the bridge just to prove it was all fake. The drive itself was unsettling. Miller's Creek was surrounded by miles of dense forest, and the 2-lane back roads twisted through endless shadows. At the time they parked near the trailhead, the only light came from the pale crescent moon above. The group followed a narrow dirt path leading deeper into the woods. With every step, the crickets and frogs around them grew quieter until the silence felt unnatural, like the entire forest was holding its breath. When they finally reached Hollow Bend Bridge, Eric was surprised at how small it looked. Built from old steel and weathered wood, the structure sagged slightly over a shallow but fast-moving river. Faded graffiti covered the railings, and weeds grew through the cracks in the asphalt. They stood there for a while, half laughing, half nervous, making jokes to hide their unease. Jake pulled out his phone and checked the time, 3:08 a.m., according to the legend. If anyone stood on the bridge at 3:15 a.m., the Lady of Hollow Bend would appear. They still didn't believe it, but something about the quiet made them hesitate to leave. The group leaned against the railing, their voices dropping to whispers without realizing it. The seconds ticked by slowly. Then Morgan stiffened. She pointed at the far end of the bridge. There, at the edge of the shadows, stood a figure. At first, Eric thought it was just another late-night explorer, someone else trying to see the so-called cursed bridge. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized the figure wasn't moving. A woman, she wore a pale dress, soaked and clinging to her frame, as though she had just stepped out of the river. Her head hung slightly forward, strands of wet hair covering most of her face. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Then, as if sensing them, the figure slowly raised her head. Even from a distance, Eric could see her skin, pale and grayish, like someone who had been underwater for far too long. Hannah whispered that they should leave, but when she turned back toward the trail, she froze. The path behind them was gone. The trail they had followed was now just blackness. No trees, no bushes, no forest floor. It was as though the world had folded in on itself, leaving them trapped on the bridge with nowhere to run. Jake pulled out his phone, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, but the light only stretched a few feet before dissolving into the void. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if they had stepped into another place entirely. Eric's heart pounded in his chest. He glanced back at the figure. She was closer now. No footsteps, no sound, just closer. It was only when he saw the surface of the river below that he realized something was wrong there, too. The water wasn't moving anymore. The ripples had frozen mid-motion, like a photograph. And in that unnatural stillness, Eric heard it. Faint, wet breathing echoing across the bridge. The woman tilted her head, and for the first time, her face came into view. Her skin was bloated and pale, but her mouth was wrong. It stretched wider than it should, her lips cracked and trembling, like something forcing her to smile. Suddenly, Morgan screamed. The sound shattered the silence, and instantly, everything changed. The woman's head snapped toward them, her body jerking forward in a way that didn't look human. One moment, she stood at the far end of the bridge. The next, she was halfway across, her soaked hair whipping in the air as though pulled by invisible hands. Jake grabbed Hannah's arm, pulling her backward, but there was nowhere to go. Behind them, the darkness swallowed everything, and ahead, the pale figure moved closer with unnatural speed. Eric felt something icy brush against his ankle. He looked down and froze. Water, the river below, had risen, but it wasn't flowing under the bridge. It was spilling upward, crawling along the metal supports and dripping onto the asphalt in thick, heavy drops. The surface of the water shimmered faintly, reflecting something. Faces, dozens of them, pale, distorted faces, just beneath the surface, their mouths opening and closing silently, as if trying to scream. The air grew colder, and the woman's wet footsteps began to echo in his ears, even though he couldn't see her moving anymore. It was as if she was everywhere at once, on the bridge, beneath the water, in the darkness behind them. Then Eric felt a hand on his shoulder, cold, thin. He spun around, but no one was there. The next moment, the woman was standing less than 5 feet away, her head tilted unnaturally far to one side, her wide, trembling grin stretching as a dark line of water dripped from her lips. Jake whispered that they needed to run, but when Eric blinked, Jake was gone. Just gone. His absence was silent, unnatural, like he'd never existed at all. Hannah's scream tore through the heavy air, and Morgan grabbed her arm before bolting toward the other side of the bridge. Somehow, without thinking, Eric followed, and just as suddenly as it had vanished, the trail returned. They stumbled through the trees, tripping over roots and rocks, until finally, the warm orange glow of their car's headlights appeared ahead. They piled inside, slamming the doors and locking them without saying a word. Eric turned the key, but the engine wouldn't start. That's when they heard it, a soft tapping on the glass. Morgan turned her head slowly, and her breath caught in her throat. The woman stood less than 2 feet away, her hand pressed against the passenger side window, her smile wider than ever. Her hair dripped dark water down her dress, pooling on the ground beneath her. And then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. The engine roared to life, and Eric hit the gas, speeding away down the dirt road without looking back. When they finally reached town, none of them spoke. The next day, Eric checked the news. A single headline caught his eye. 2 more missing near Hollow Bend Bridge. His stomach turned cold. There was no mention of Jake's name, no missing person report. It was as if Jake had never existed. That night, as Eric lay in bed, he heard faint dripping sounds from somewhere inside his room. When he turned his head, he saw a wet footprint on his floor, and then another, and another, leading straight to his bed. It was well past midnight when Eric decided to cut through the back streets of downtown Seattle. The drizzle had turned into a steady mist, softening the glow of the streetlights and wrapping the entire city in a faint haze. His shift at the diner had run later than expected, and the buses had already stopped running for the night. The only way home was a 20-minute walk, and taking the narrow alley behind Pike Street shaved off almost 5. Eric had lived in Seattle for 2 years, though people often whispered about its strange urban legends. He'd never paid much attention to them. One story in particular always made the rounds among college students. Something about a smiling man who wandered the streets late at night, silently following strangers until they reached home. Supposedly, if anyone spoke to him or made eye contact for too long, they'd vanish within the week. Eric didn't believe in things like that. Still, as he stepped into the alley, he noticed how unusually quiet it was. There were no cars, no voices, not even the distant hum of traffic. Only the faint drip of water from rusted pipes echoed in the darkness. The alley stretched long and narrow, with brick walls pressing close on either side. Dim yellow lights hung every 30 feet, but some had burned out completely, leaving pockets of shadow between faint pools of glow. Eric shoved his hands into his hoodie and walked quickly, trying to ignore the unease crawling at the back of his neck. About halfway down, he heard it, soft shuffle. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, maybe a loose bottle rolling somewhere, or the wind dragging trash across the ground. But then came another sound, a slow, deliberate footstep, landing carefully, almost in rhythm with his own. Eric froze and turned slightly, glancing over his shoulder. Under one of the flickering streetlights, about 40 feet behind him, a man stood perfectly still. His clothes looked strangely outdated, a dark coat that hung down to his knees, scuffed black shoes, and a pale shirt buttoned all the way to the collar. But what struck Eric wasn't the clothes, it was the smile. The man's lips were curled unnaturally wide, too far for his face, and though the shadows covered his eyes, the expression was unmistakable. He was grinning directly at him. Eric's first thought was that the guy might just be drunk, someone wandering around after a night at one of the nearby bars. But then the man moved, stepping forward smoothly, almost gliding, his arms hanging limply at his sides, while his smile never faltered. Eric turned back around and quickened his pace, telling himself not to panic. The exit of the alley was just ahead, less than a block away, but the footsteps behind him picked up too, not running, just matching his pace exactly. Eric's breathing grew shallow. He pulled out his phone and opened the camera, pretending to check a message, angling the screen to use it as a mirror. The man was closer now. Under the weak glow of another light, Eric caught a clearer glimpse of his face. It wasn't just a smile, it was his entire expression. His head tilted slightly too far to one side, like his neck wasn't sitting right, and his mouth hung open, as though the grin was carved into his skin. Eric thought about saying something, maybe asking if the man was okay, but something deep inside screamed at him not to. Then he remembered the urban legend. Never speak to the smiling man. The alley exit came into view. Eric didn't run, not yet, but he lengthened his stride, forcing his body forward. His footsteps echoed loudly now, bouncing off the brick walls. And then, without warning, the sound of the other footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening. Eric hesitated, glancing down at the wet pavement, and noticed a faint reflection. The man wasn't 40 feet behind him anymore. He was 10 feet away. Eric's chest tightened, his pulse thundering in his ears. He stepped forward, forcing himself not to look back. But then came a sound so soft, he almost thought he imagined it. A low, wet chuckle. Eric broke into a sprint. His shoes splashed through puddles as he shot out of the alley and onto the main street, illuminated by the faint glow of distant neon signs. He ran 3 blocks without stopping, finally collapsing near a well-lit intersection. He bent over, catching his breath, his hands trembling. When he finally dared to look behind him, the alley was empty. By the time he got home, Eric had convinced himself the man had just been some late-night wanderer, maybe someone playing a prank. But when he pulled out his phone to text his roommate, he noticed something odd. The screen had a faint smudge across the glass, so he wiped it with his sleeve, but the mark didn't go away. It wasn't a smudge. It was a reflection, faint, blurred, and pale, of someone standing right behind him when he'd taken the camera out earlier. The next night, Eric refused to walk home. He took a rideshare, checking over his shoulder the entire time. But when he stepped into his apartment, he noticed something sitting on the floor by his door. A small, folded piece of paper, in neat, sharp handwriting. It read, "I like when you walk fast." Eric's chest went cold. He stepped inside, locked every door and window, and drew the blinds shut. But that night, around 3 a.m., he woke suddenly to a strange sound coming from outside his bedroom window. A faint, rhythmic tapping. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The tapping grew louder, faster, and then stopped all at once. When the silence stretched too long, Eric slowly reached for his phone, using the front camera like a mirror to avoid looking directly at the glass. Behind him, in the faint reflection, was the outline of a man standing outside his window. And even through the dark glass, the teeth showed first. That same impossible smile